All right, I think we're back with you here, and looks like we're, as many of you can tell, we're in the new studio trying to get it looking a little bit different than it has been just recently. But welcome to another episode on the live stream. Ask Me Anything at We the Govern. My name's Glenn Morgan, and hopefully everybody on this live stream has brought your questions with you so that we can do our best. I'll do my best anyway to answer your questions. No guarantees I have an answer, but I will do my best to answer it as best that I can. Now, I'm just trying to get some things set up in the studio. Again, this is for clarity. This isn't my studio. I've actually just some very generous people have been allowing me to use this studio, and that's what's made it give me the opportunity to do shows like this. And so anyway, I'm just in the process of still getting used to some of the setup here. So bear with me if I am a little slow on some of the technical things. Just a quick reminder, as you see right here with the pop-up bug there, don't forget to use the @WeTheGoverned when you're going to ask a question. It's just a little bit easier for me to spot the question as the questions kind of start to pile up. And depending on whether you're looking at this on the phone or your computer or something, might be down below, might be to the side. But when you go to type in those questions, I generally try to answer the questions in the order in which you send them to me, so that I'm not trying to skip over anybody's question. I'm not trying to skip a tough question. It's just sometimes I miss the questions because I don't see them at all. So if you can, just try to make sure that you're making sure the questions are really clear. And I guess when I have a serious point to make, this is just giving you a different perspective from this side of the room. Or I guess if I'm going to make a serious point, I'll zoom in and do something really close or tight there. Anyway, I'm just enjoying trying to figure this out a little bit here and get a little more comfortable to it. Now, I did listen to many of your comments on the new studio setup here, so I brought a couple flags. I got the American flag and the Washington State flag here as well, and that adds, I think, a little bit more of a visual background instead of the black perspective that you were getting otherwise. And I did see a couple of you complained about that from my first, or at least we had that as comments. I won't say that was complaining, but at least you had it as comments about what you liked or didn't like about the studio. The other thing I was going to mention, usually and historically over the last couple of years, usually when I start the live stream, I'll tell you where I'm going to be speaking at next. And I didn't bring in kind of my list of speaking engagements that I have coming up. Mostly those start in January. I do have a couple of smaller events I'm meeting just with activists before Christmas and New Year, or in between, I think, coming up. But I just have a couple of those, but they aren't really public or on the schedule. But there are some that I do have scheduled for January. I know at least I have a couple over in Spokane, and I also have one up in Medina, and a variety of others around the state. And I just didn't write it down with me. I kind of think at this point in time, not too many people are really setting their 2026 schedule yet. But next week, I will try to bring in my January schedule at least. So if you're interested in meeting me in person or coming up and asking a question to me directly and see if I answer it any differently than I do here in the studio, that'll be your chance. And I'll lay out a couple of these different events and where they're going to be at, and hopefully one of them is going to be close to you if you're interested in coming to either a Doge Washington training or hearing me speak at one of these other events. So there'll be some of those I know coming up, and usually I like to start out a live stream with that information in the beginning. Now, the headline on this basically was on tonight's live stream was just asking, with all of the flooding, and I mean, we really do have quite a bit of rain out there and some legitimate flooding going on around the state. I'm very aware of how the media has tended over the years to hype up weather events and make it seem like it's the Armageddon of all time, with no historical context into it, and it turns out to be not much. But in this case, actually, there's been enough rain over the last week or so, and it looks like we're getting more, that at least in the Pacific Northwest, there's a legitimate amount of problems being caused by the high rainfall, oversaturation of soils, landslides, erosion of roads. If you live anywhere off of Highway 2, I am sorry for you because you are definitely going to be suffering up there. I saw the Tumwater Canyon fall photos on the Highway 2 road out to Leavenworth, and that does not look good. It looks like it's a complete disaster. And I heard that they were saying that the Highway 2 Stevens Pass would probably be shut down for months, and it looks pretty bad to me as well. Also, the I-90 eastbound lanes where it looked like the river was eroding the bank away underneath the freeway, at least on some of the right lanes there as well. That looks like a disaster to me. So there's definitely going to be some engineering work that needs to be done to kind of get around that issue. But also, if you're out in Enumclaw, what I saw out there looked terrible. Whatcom and Snohomish, just significant floodwaters. Cowlitz, Chehalis not far from me as well. But the one that really concerned me the most was actually the levee failure down in Renton. And I only say that because it's always I grew up in that area, and I'm pretty familiar with how they put in the Green River levee system originally, and when they put the Howard Hansen Dam up, but and then just the way between the Cedar River and the Green River, those two dams are essentially what do a lot of flood control in the Kent, Auburn, and Renton area and Tukwila area. And when you see the levee fail, if you've ever been there, I used to run along that levee a lot when I was training. And there's a nice path on top, and it runs. In fact, this was the first year in 50 years the Kent Christmas Rush was actually canceled because of, which was a road race down in Kent that I used to run a lot, and my son started running it later, and it's been canceled for the first time in 50 years. So the floodwaters have really made a mess of the Kent Valley, and that levee failure was particularly concerning because if they do have a catastrophic levee failure, that one dumped a bunch of water that was flooding some of the warehouses there. But if they really do have a catastrophic failure down there, you're kind of going back to looking at like a 1933 flood or a 1947 flood. Both of which really flooded Tukwila, Renton, Kent, and Auburn pretty extensively if you go back and look in the historical photos. And at least according to my grandfather at the time, particularly the flood of 1933, he thought that was the worst. And our old farmhouse, if you know where South Center is today, there's Bahama Breeze there. That was the farmhouse location for my great-grandfather. That's where he built in 1919. And when it flooded in 1933, they actually had to tie a rowboat to the top floor, the upper story deck, and they moved upstairs, and they lived in that during the flooding. And he would have to go pick up his grandfather, my great grandfather, over on Tukwila Hill every day with a rowboat during the whole flood. So it was that was pretty bad. And of course, the Skagit River looks like that they're starting to reach one of the highest levels that they've ever seen up there. And the entire Skagit Valley is at risk. The Nooksack, of course, up in Whatcom. All of these are rivers I'm pretty familiar with, and it's been just amazing looking at the Stillaguamish and the Skykomish, just all the river overflowing and flooding. And then the damage that you're seeing out there, it is pretty significant. But of course, the question is that flooding, as harmful and damaging, destructive as it is it as bad as bad government? Is government more harmful than the flooding? Now, I think that was the question that I was asking. And it's one that you can tell me what you think as we get into today's live stream. So I'm getting a lot of comments. Let's just jump right in here and get to some of the questions. And again, any comments or here's a good one. Any comments or recommendations you might have, feel free to send them to me. Again, this isn't my studio. I feel blessed to be able to actually be here to be able to use a facility like this. But let me know what you think, and if you have any suggestions, we can jump into it. But for now, I'm going to get to the questions, because if I don't start doing it now, I'm going to run out of time, run out of questions here. So the first question I have here is from IDRI Wizard, and the question is, what's rising faster, flood waters or taxes? Well, over the last 6 days, I would say that the flood waters have risen faster, because the primary increase in taxes actually occurred back in, or at least the foundation for it really occurred this last legislative session. But we definitely are starting to pay taxes at a much higher rate than we have in the past. And as you know, our state budget's gone up in 10 years about 100%. 5%, with about 40% of the value that we probably were getting, if it was valuable at all, from government 10 years ago. So we're paying more, we're getting less, and the already marginal quality of government and the services it delivers to us has continued to drop. Let's get down to the next question here. Michael Case, 8231. Not being funny, but doesn't the state have enough money in the rainy day fund to cover the costs needed to fix the levees that broke? Who was responsible for taking care of that? Oh, that's a good question. The answer actually is yes. The state actually does have a pretty sizable rainy day fund, and but again, what they'll probably be trying to do is to get FEMA funding or emergency funding from the feds if they can kind of squeeze the feds for that. That would be my guess is what they do. I mean, if you really look at it, there's several federal highways: Highway 2, Highway 90. I don't know 410. I think that's probably a state highway, but 167. There's a lot of different roads that have had substantial damage to them. And I saw a video recently, aerial video of a road down in Oregon that had one of the largest landslides that the Oregon Department of Transportation had ever seen. Then I saw in Montana one of the bridges collapse into rushing water there, which you don't see that every day. So my guess is there's probably going to be a lot of emergency funds that they're looking at. The real concern in Renton is not so much the fact that they had that one levee fail. They did jump in there because it's essentially an engineering solution, and they were able to patch that spot. The concern is the high level saturation that's going to hit most of the levees in the Auburn, Renton, kind of Tukwila area, and that affects that area. Most of those are earthen levees. And if you get enough water with the hydrostatic pressure on it, it's going to eventually seep in and weaken those levees substantially if it stays at that high level long enough, let alone goes over the top somewhere. If it really does get high enough to blow over the top, then I would definitely not be having any of my cars parked down anywhere in the Kent-Auburn Valley. I would try to get them up on the hill somewhere, west or east hill, doesn't matter. Get them high and get them out of there. And if I was a house, especially if I live in an apartment in the lower floor, I would make sure I had a place to get all my stuff up, because the Kent Valley has flooded wall to wall in the past. 1933 was the last time that I remember it, that I was told that it actually did that. But it has made a mess in the past, and it could do that again. And hopefully the Green River Dam and the Cedar River dams don't have any trouble up higher. There has been some concerns over the years on that, and that would be where we would have a seriously catastrophic event for that area, is if one of those dams fails. So hopefully they don't. Let's see. I'm going to get in here. All right. Somebody there doesn't like the background. He says it's a bit dour. Okay, I know that it could potentially be a bit dour here, but this is a beautiful studio actually, and so I am not one to complain at all. It's just that it's set up to be generic so that other people could come in here and use the studio in whatever way they wanted to. And so I do have the flag. I guess that's always a little bit colorful. You have the Washington State flag right here, and so that adds a little bit of color to the background. I'll try to see if I can come up with some other background that'll make it a little more interesting, but I do appreciate the feedback. Let's jump in here. Okay. Actually, let me follow up a little bit more. Michael Case's second part of that question. Who's responsible for taking care of that? Yeah, usually when it's a levee failure, they already have funding that's set up in, I can't remember though, on the Green River, if that's which local entity. It's a group of cities that basically contribute, I believe, to that levee project. But if you remember right, they don't do a lot of work there except for when they're taking out plants or trees that are starting to erode it in some way. I remember once kayaking down that part of the Green River, not an exciting kayak at all. It's like a float trip, but I remember doing it anyway, just to do it. And there is actually, they will sometimes come by there and get rid of some of those trees down there in that area. And that probably is some of the funding that they would use. I'm assuming that's also King County tied into that. But they're going to try to get federal FEMA flooding, just because once you get a state of emergency, it essentially opens the floodgates. To use just a terrible pun there, but basically it opens the floodgates and it allows them to bring in some federal funding. And we'll see what happens. I don't, we don't know yet actually how damaging this weather event is going to, how damaging it's going to get. Remember, it has been worse, and it truly has been. I know for people that were born yesterday, this seems like the worst flooding event you might have ever seen in that area. But if you go back and you look further back in the record, it's actually flooded substantially worse with much higher rainfall back in the 30s. And I believe it was 1916, and I thought 47 was fairly close to that as well. But obviously, there were fewer people living here at that time, and they may not have been making, in theory, the same level of measurement that we do today. So let's see if I can get down. Oh, there it is. Sorry. I'm just trying to get my scroll down here to some of these questions. Oh, there are a lot of questions here now. Let's get my Low Henderson 9407. I see a question there, although it's a little bit easier for me to spot it if you hit @WeTheGoverned. And it says, Glenn, do you think the initiatives will get enough signatures? I have pretty good transparency on the two Let's Go Washington initiatives. And from what I'm hearing, they're getting a lot of signatures coming in. It sounded like they were already over the minimum level on one of them and getting very close. They're probably over both of them by now, but I actually was picking up a bunch of signature sheets while I was over in Pasco just on Friday and Saturday. And if I met you over there in Pasco, picking them up, thank you guys so much. I was just volunteering while I was there to pick up signature sheets and bring them back. And, it was a decent stack of signature sheets. Again, nothing compared to what they're getting in all the time. But I just happened to be driving through, and I got some in Ellensburg, and I got some in Pasco. And I know they were doing a big collection of sheets that were already signed out in Yakima. Probably tomorrow, if I remember right. But they're running around collecting them from everywhere. This is the time to get it in. Obviously, you got Christmas holidays coming up, even though, and I know they say December 19th probably for mailing, but they can still keep going out and gathering these sheets. It's just, if you got it, make sure you get it sent back into them. And if you haven't filled out all of them, that's okay. Just get it sent in. The key is not to wait any longer. Make it easier, especially for the people there who are volunteering and scanning and tracking and trying to make sure they're getting their counts correct. Make it easier for them. Let them enjoy a Christmas and a New Year too, knowing that that they're way ahead, or that they're far enough ahead, or that they can breathe easy. Just get those things in as soon as possible. I don't have as much transparency on the ID that the state GOP is running. So that initiative, I know I had a pile of them that I turned in for them as well, but I don't know where they're at on those. I haven't heard any numbers exactly, but we will see. The turn-in schedule date for all three of those would be it's not, usually it's in December, but this year, because of the time frame the way the calendar worked, I believe it pushed it into one of the first days in January. So I can't remember if it's the second or the third, something like that, where they're going to be turning them in at the Secretary of State's office. And that is a drop-dead date, so they do have to have them all turned in then. So I think they're going in to drop them off. So I do anticipate that two and possibly all three will be getting enough of those signatures out there. There's another question down here that says... And sorry, this is another question here. IDRI Wizard, thank you for all your questions. Isn't that whole area a floodplain? And the answer is yes, it is. It's also a Lahar zone. So if Mount Rainier decides to actually blow up, you can expect a massive Lahar, depending on how large it is, coming down from the melted glaciers, and a big wall of debris that would shoot down through Ording, and that whole area, Algona, that whole place would be definitely buried. In fact, that is what the base of the Kent Valley is. And if you were at all involved in farming down there, you would know that there's some great farmland down there now. It's been turned mostly into warehouses now, but people will get a chance to experience why it was good farmland if it floods as bad as it could. Let's hope it doesn't, but they're going to have a lot of people, a lot of problems down there. Let's keep going down the questions here, and I'm trying to not miss anything. I don't know why I'm having... Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to get... you would think that it would be a little simpler here. There it is. Nope. I think government is the flooding. Yes, that's a great point. Lancelot Duframe, I think the government is the flooding. Yes, we don't want more bad government, since that seems to be all we get with these guys. And so we're trying to not have such horrible government most of the time. And I'm trying to get this to scroll up here. So sorry, this is my own problem and not yours. And there's nothing more boring than watching somebody deal with an issue with the technical side of what they're trying to do here. There's another question here. This is from Jim Kuhn 01T. It says, what is the current status of DOJ lawsuit against Washington to discuss voter rolls? Has the Attorney General Bob Brown or Sideshow commented any further? And at this point in time, so let me end the first part. I don't think they've commented yet significantly on it, but I do want to make a point that generally what we've seen with, remember, there's 18 states right now that have had the Department of Justice has come after 18 states. I believe we were number 14. They filed multiple lawsuits against several of the states after they filed the one against Washington State. But 18 states are essentially caught up in the Department of Justice effort to try to clean up the voter rolls. And for the most part, these are the pro-fraud states. So it's the usual suspects: Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine. There's a bunch of them out there that absolutely don't want any transparency with how screwed up and incompetent their whole voting system has been. I will point out that only 2 states have completely jumped in and invited the Department of Justice to look at their voter rolls. And I'm going to point out, even in those states where clearly they're trying to be as transparent as they possibly can, even in those states, they've been finding problems. Lots of people that aren't alive that are on the voter rolls, lots of problems with non-U.S. citizens registered to vote and in voting in many cases on the voter rolls. They haven't really reported how many people have voted after death. Because we do know that there's a lot more to life after death than just voting. But whatever that amount is, I'm interested in seeing what those numbers are. But it sounded like they've already removed 750,000 bad, voters from the voter rolls. That includes Texas. If you've moved to Texas and you think you escaped Washington, there's a lot of bad voter rolls that have been fluffed up in Texas. The left has been actively working in that state, just like they were in Florida. Many friends of mine were down working in Florida for years trying to clean up their voter rolls after 2020. And it was amazing to see what kind of problems they had uncovered in Florida, which is not run by Democrats. There's these bad actors trying to manipulate the voter rolls have been doing this for a long, long time. And cleaning up the voter rolls is one of the easier ways to make it harder to cheat in the future. Now, some places like Washington want to make it easier to cheat. California is even worse in a lot of the ways that they've manipulated and ignored and don't want to clean up their voter rolls. But right now, we're essentially in the spot where, of the states that are in litigation, most of them have. A couple have responded. Some have been asking for more time to respond. They're in federal court. There's going to be some motion practice back and forth. I would anticipate that different states are going to try different novel efforts to try to be secretive. If you remember the Jim Crow South Democrats, when they were trying to, those Democrats back then were trying to hide their voter rolls too, so they tried a bunch of different games in the past to try to conceal voter rolls. Same thing the Democrats did the post-Reconstruction South, trying to conceal their voter rolls from the feds and make it so they couldn't see what was going on. And really, this is just a new chapter in the same old game. And Nick Brown and Bob Ferguson and Steve Hobbs are right in the middle of it. They're the guys on our side who are trying to be as dishonest as possible. Jay Watkins 8357. Here's a question: what are we doing to get the illegals off our roads? Well, that's a great question. The Department of Justice forced Washington State's Department of Licensing to admit recently, I believe it was about 10 days ago, that we did register, and this is, by the way, the smallest number that I think they found. I believe they'll find that there's more than this. But they admitted now that they've registered 700 illegal aliens to drive big rigs with get CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, and they shouldn't have gotten those licenses. Now, that's what they've admitted. The reality, of course, is it's going to be a lot worse. Now, in theory, the Department of Transportation has required the Department of Licensing to rescind those commercial driver's licenses. There's actually been a bigger problem in New York and California than there has been in Washington. New York was a state, remember, that famously they're showing the commercial driver's licenses with names like "no name given." That was actually the name on the commercial driver's license when they were doing road checks in Oklahoma, and they were catching them there. So California's had a similar problem. If you saw my video that I did, I think I launched it today, about the 167 accident. 167 is closed right now down in the Kent Valley, but when it was open just last week, a illegal driver couldn't speak English. Another, it was an Indian driver, killed a Bonnie Lake guy. Just in a car who had stopped, and the illegal semi-truck driver smashed into the back of him, crushed him against another truck, and killed him in the car. And that guy did have a commercial driver's license issued from California, but that was an illegal commercial driver's license given to somebody who couldn't speak English, didn't know how to drive, obviously, and was out there killing people on the roads. Washington State, King County very specifically, decided to release him on a $100,000 bond, and they ignored the ICE detainer because ICE wants to deport him, of course. And King County would prefer that he gets back out there and kills more people, and that's what they did. So I think the main thing is they're having them rescind or pull these driver's licenses from the system in theory. But as we saw, if you had paid attention to some of the other videos I did about that Lacey accident, for example, the Mexican national who caused that, he was driving a car hauler in Lacey and caused a 4-car pileup. Nobody was killed, but he did hit a school bus, and he didn't have a commercial driver's license, and there was no insurance, of course. And of course, they didn't honor a detainer on that guy either. And so he's back out there. He's been deported multiple times with a long criminal record, of course. But that's who the Democrats want to have here, and they're expecting them to vote as well. So we've got a lot of work to do. The problem is, of course, as I've said in my other videos, is that it won't matter where you moved. This stuff spreads like a really bad disease, and these guys are out driving their trucks all over the country, not just in Washington, and they're killing people all over the place. And that is why we really do need to crack down on this and fix some of these issues, because if we don't do it now, it's not going to fix itself. It isn't going to reform itself. And I think we've got a lot of work to do to clean it up. Oh, boy, there are a lot of questions now, so let me just keep jumping in here. Let's see. Let's see where I missed it. That's the last question. So anyway, I don't know if we're getting them all off the road, but at least there does seem to be a plan to do it. Let's see. We've always had flooding issues. This is James Goddard, 871. We've always had flooding issues, sometimes more, sometimes less. The west side of the state is wet, and the Cascades create a rain shadow. This storm can be unpredictably split by the Olympics, right? Which is really what you saw. They were actually, depending on the prevailing winds, the Olympics created their own rain shadow, and sometimes you'd hit North Whatcom. Sometimes it would swing up, and you'd hit where I live down in South Thurston County. And it was kind of impressive to see just where that shift would go. Where we live, if you've lived in the Pacific Northwest for any length of time, it just surprises me if you're not living on top of a hill a little bit, or at least quite a ways higher than the highest floodplain that you could imagine. But that's just me. A little tough to do that, I know, if you're in the Skagit Valley, although there's several hills around there that I'd be looking at. So right now, the water's pretty higher than it's been really recently. Here's a question from Kathleen 253. Wasn't SR 167 basically marshland? It was sort of by the part that you're thinking. If you're familiar with 167, where it comes, it kind of swings over closer to the East Hill, Kent, and it goes by Renton Hill in that area. When they opened the ship canal locks from Lake Union to Puget Sound, and they connected Lake Washington with Lake Union, they dropped the level of Lake Washington by about 8 feet. And until then, you had actually Lake Washington covered a lot of what's currently Renton, or there was a lot of kind of marshy area there. And all of that went away because of the 8-foot drop. And it was a permanent drop because they're essentially connected with Puget Sound. And so they had to drop it lower to match Lake Union. And so basically, Lake Union and then out to Puget Sound, that becomes the flow. And that's why the Black River disappeared, because it originally flowed from Lake Washington, went around the Tukwila into the Duwamish, and they decided to reroute the Cedar River before they had actually opened that part. But if you're ever familiar with downtown Renton and you see the Cedar River, and it seems just so perfectly straight right there, and it goes underneath the library and all that. And I used to run there as well, and that was one of the places where I used to swim as a kid. But that river's actually all fake. It's man-made. It was man-made, a century ago. And so they did it for flood control purposes at the time. And when they put that in, that's why they build right up next to it. That's completely artificial, that whole part from there to Lake Washington. But then they used Lake Washington, and that was one of their ways of mitigating flooding on the Duwamish as well. And so this is kind of, there's some fun history there. Surprisingly, despite everything the enviros will tell you today, the salmon, of course, somehow seem to figure out how to migrate upstream, despite all the confusion that they must have been under with with rivers rerouted, disappearing, changing, how they go and spawn up which streams, so I do find that to be kind of an interesting thing. But yes, a lot of 167 is built on marshland. The entire valley down there, and this is changed by them putting warehouses, there is a high risk factor of supersaturation in the soil down there because the water table, nobody's pumping that water table really, and so the groundwater is very, very high. Let's see. As for the Democrats, they are far worse than the floods. Okay, this is James Goddard 871. Probably not too many people watching this right now would dispute that. Here's a question from TZ Burton. Can you address the King County DCHS loss of $1.5 billion overpayments? No one is being held accountable, but next year they're going to be transparent. Trust us. Okay, so if in case you've missed this story, and I think this is an important story actually, King County had about $1.5 billion that they were kicking out, mostly to it was just a bunch of DEI, feel good, virtue signaling, let's help the criminals, juvenile justice center reform, all kinds of nonprofit grifting operations. And they set aside this massive, massive increase in the budget right around the time COVID kicked in. So lots of easy money floating around, no accountability. As predicted, and as was quite predictable at the time, a lot of that money was stolen and basically stolen from fraud. King County wanted to do their own audit on it when I believe Reagan Dunn wanted to look into it. He wasn't alone, but he was one of the people who kind of got a point on this. And when he was digging into it, or when they finally had this auditor, and I really think that what she did was very brave. I mean, they only audited 1.5% of the grants. And of course, they found fraud everywhere, constantly all over the place. Now, what King County's trying to do is to make it seem like it's not as bad as it really is by not looking, put your blinders on and pretend like the fraud isn't as bad as it really is. Think Minnesota. That's Tim Walz, Governor Walz in a nutshell. King County does this all the time, so they don't want to really find the fraud. They're pretending that they're going to be transparent, but nobody really believes them. If you know them, you know they're lying. And of course, nobody's held accountable right now as everybody's gone to the winds with the millions of dollars they've stolen. We don't know actually totally how much money was stolen. Certainly, it was wasted, but how much of it was truly stolen, we'll have to find out. And it's just still in a big mess right now. I think part of this is, remember, deny, delay, deflect. So right now we're in the delay phase. So first they denied it, then the report came out. And frankly, I think that King County auditor, she probably put that report out and I don't think many people understand how much pressure comes on people like that in those positions to actually prevent them from telling the truth or to color it. She may have even colored it a little bit just to make it look like it wasn't as bad as it really was, with all the inevitable pressure that was probably coming down on her from all these special interests. But nevertheless, if you read what she wrote and between the lines of what she wrote, it's a total fiasco and a disaster. And thank God she actually wrote that, because the secretary, or we have an auditor's office at state level, they'll never look at it, and they would prefer not to look at it. So nobody really wants to find the fraud. So after they get past the denial level, then what they're trying to do is seeing if they can just kick it down the road long enough and keep it out of the news long enough that they can protect their narrative, so they can raise your taxes to do the same thing all over again, maybe under a different name or under a different approach. But think Minnesota, New York, California, Oregon, Colorado, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maine. This is how they operate day in, day out. And Washington State is right in the middle of the same problem, Illinois, of course. And so your taxpayer dollars, as much as you pay, it gets wasted, a good percentage of it. And I do not want to let that one go. There's another question here from Jeff Steele. When Senator Murray uses the blue slip, is that like a veto, or can it be undone? So this is kind of an interesting question, because the blue slip is a prerogative that has built up over many, many years. I believe over 100 years. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And that's become this ability. It's a way for federal senators to exercise some level of power over the appointment process. And it's not specifically spelled out constitutionally. It's not spelled out in law. It's just become a prerogative that they've given to senators, that if they don't like the appointment of somebody for either a judge or usually it's for the Department of Justice, so the lead attorney in the various offices. We have 2 offices in our state, one out of Spokane, one out of Seattle. But if they don't like those attorneys that have been appointed or recommended to be appointed in there, they can basically not respond and say, listen, I don't want this person to be there. And for the most part, that is upheld, and they usually don't put those people through into those positions. The Republicans in the federal Senate like this because they use it themselves. The Democrats tend to abuse this more than the Republicans do, mostly because they have stiffer spines and they are all about the power. The Republicans are all about the image, and so they like to use it. They like the idea of using it, but they don't do anything near what the Democrats typically do on this. And so when you hear Trump talking about getting rid of the blue slip, ultimately that has to be done by the Republicans in the Senate at this point. But they're reluctant to do it because they don't want to lose their own prerogative. And so that's the big fight that's going on. And so you see Trump dancing around with Pete Serrano, as I showed in my video this morning, where he was appointed as an interim attorney and didn't get the nomination yet, 120 days. You're allowed to do that for 120 days. And then as that 120 days is ending, you see Pam Bondi trying to appoint him into another capacity. It's essentially different name, but basically filling in the same role. And so that's why Pete Serrano's not going anywhere anytime soon, because Senator Patty Murray came out and said she wasn't going to ever vote for him. But frankly, she's never going to vote for anybody who's honest. She'll stick to only her corrupt crew, of which they have a lot of them in our state. And so it's much harder to find really good people or even remotely honest people in these positions. And so it's going to be tough, and it can be undone, but it's going to be a little different. It's a battle that ends up having less to do with Trump than it's going to have to do with the federal Senate. Next question down here. I think this is Jason Fisher. 1530. Hey, Glenn, sorry about missing last week. My car died in the highway. Hopefully you didn't run into deep water there. Do you think we will see more tax increases this year? Tax bills are coming out of the woodwork. Yeah, they're going to propose a bunch of tax bills. I don't think you're going to see most of those go anywhere. And even if they do, one of the things to remember is that they can't really impose any of these taxes anytime soon. It won't affect the 2026 budget at all. Maybe they could get at some kind of tax that impacts the 2027 budget. And so like when you saw Ferguson come out and pretend like he was going to be virtuous and suddenly rediscovered math that he doesn't believe exists and said, oh, this is going to be an all cuts budget. Well, it's really not true. I mean, it is in the sense that they do have to make cuts in the budget because they don't have enough money to cover it. My gut tells me actually, though, that they're probably to get through a year that they may be a little concerned about elections. And remember, 2026 is an election time, even in Washington state. And so because of that, most of the legislators, they're only there for a short session. It's 60 days and not 90. They want to get back so they can fundraise, so they can campaign, so they can protect their turf. They don't really want to provide a lot of campaign fodder for their opposition. So historically, for the last century or so, they generally don't do things like that during. They don't do controversial tax increases or anything. They might nibble around the edges during this type of a session, but this is also something that most of these, especially Democrats, have never really experienced, which is having to cut the budget. And so we've been blessed in this state with an overwhelming amount of cash that came in, usually exceeding forecasts all the time. And now that they've imposed these other taxes and the economic conditions being what they are, the tax receipts are diving, and they just are. And they're chasing out businesses, and then they're surprised that they aren't getting as much tax dollars in as they thought they were. Seattle's setting itself on fire and kind of self-immolating as the political class there, throws a tantrum. And so a lot of this stuff is going to add up, and it finally added up enough that they realized they're just not going to get the money that they thought they were. My gut tells me that they're going to try to raid the rainy day fund. And the reason why they're going to do that is they'll say, oh, emergency, blame Trump, whatever the story is, and let's get some money in here to keep the gravy train going for our political supporters, make sure the unions are happy with us, because if they aren't, then we're going to run into some real trouble in November, and make sure that these other special interest grifting operations are happy with us so that they can keep recycling that into campaign cash. And that's essentially the way they're going to be thinking right now. And the rainy day fund, even though it's bad policy to raid it, it doesn't have a political constituency that's bitter and angry about the rainy day fund being raided. And so historically, that's what Democrats have done. And so I think Gregoire did that back in the day when she ran into I think she was the last governor that actually had a budget shortfall. And so that's generally what they'll do. And they'll say, well, maybe it'll get better in the future. It's kind of like rob Peter to pay Paul. And it doesn't come with any of the political downside. Now, remember, Washington State can't print money like the feds, so we don't have the ability to do that, thank God. But they're going to have to try to sort some of the stuff out. And what the feds should do right now, other than listen, for emergency funding to fix a levee or freeway, I think that's probably fine. But I would be cutting off all funds to Washington State until they become honest and open and transparent about their voter rolls, until they clean up all the fraud that exists at DSHS and Department of Licensing. That's what I would do. And I'd play hardball with them regardless. And it's not like you get any credit for helping out this crew, our political class in Washington State. And so make them deal with some of the issues that they've created. And we'll see what happens. But I would not bet that they're actually going to pass one. I realize everybody, and I don't know if it's clickbait or anything, and it's always possible. Believe me, the Democrats have always wanted to have an income tax in our state. It's one of the things that's very much frustrated them for a long time. But and they know that our judges are thoroughly and comprehensively corrupt with almost no exceptions. And so one of the challenges probably one of the things that they think they've overcome is that even if they do an illegal, unconstitutional tax increase, they may try to narrow it down in such a way that they'll run it up as a challenge so that the corrupt Supreme Court, Washington State Supreme Court, would just uphold it and ignore the state constitution. So we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of kind of legal battles that have the potential to go there, but there's also political fights that are going on. And depending on the nature of the exposés that'll be coming out in the next few months in Washington State on the DSHS fraud, on the illegal immigrant fraud, on all these other fraud operations that you're seeing exposed in Minnesota, and believe me, we have the same things here. They may not be as big, but they're here as well. that may be taking a little bit of wind out of their sails with their desire to have higher taxes. So we'll see what happens. I would expect the Seattle Times, King 5 News, the usual suspects to do everything they can to cover up the fraud. They've done it so far, so they won't report the truth under any scenario. They've had whistleblowers come to them just like they've come to me. And so I know that they'll definitely act on and protect the government and hide the truth. And so you're going to have to see, it'll probably break an alternative in national news rather than with any of the classic kind of mainstream corrupt media, whatever's left of it. Let's see. Somebody in here mentioned that the levee didn't look that bad. And you're right. I mean, just for one levee failure, but that was a catastrophic failure. And it indicates oversaturation of soils. And so if you had it fail there, it's going to probably fail in several other places. And so even though they did fix that one, it's reaching this point where you could see big failures now elsewhere, depending on how much water they have to release from the dam up above. And by the way, Jason, sorry about your car dying on the highway. Again, I hope you didn't hit high water there. IDRI Wizard, what's the next step in the process of the initiatives if they do secure the needed signatures? And is there anything we can do to help the process? Well, what happens is they have their event first couple days of January. I would encourage you, if you live in the Tumwater area, it's kind of neat to go to one of these. I'll probably be there to film it and just do a quick story about it myself. But they submit these. I've been there before and handed in the boxes, and it's kind of fun to be there. So they'll do a press conference out front. It's outside of the Secretary of State's office in Tumwater. And they'll submit them, turn them in, and then they'll go in for signature validation. So here's what they do. Probably, I would expect that if you read on, I believe that they have to turn in 308,000. I realize that's different than a couple years ago, but that number is actually determined by a percentage of the total vote count that was for the previous governor's race. And because we had fewer people participate in the most recent governor's race, that lowered the threshold for the signatures that have to be turned in. So it's a little bit less, like 308,000 is what I remember, but nobody would turn in just 308,000. You need to collect, according to the Secretary of State's website, about 15% more than the minimum, because you're always going to have some duplicates or some bad signatures or whatever. So you turn in 380,000 or maybe more, maybe 400,000, whatever the amount is. And so the reason why at this point in time, if you're gathering these signatures, is so important is you're building that buffer. One time, Tim Eyman turned in signatures and could have gotten another 10,000 signatures, but he's trying to save money, and so he didn't. And he submitted what he had, and they ended up having to count it, and he fell just short of getting that particular initiative on the ballot. Nobody wants to repeat that, so typically they'll be trying to get that money, quite a bit more. Then what happens is the Secretary of State, by law, is obligated to go in and do signature validation or voter validation, essentially to make sure that the signatures on the initiatives are valid, that there's registered voters there, and they pay a lot more attention to this than anybody in the state of Washington has ever paid to any of the elections, certainly. But what they do is it's actually a statistical sampling model that they randomly select a certain number of sheets out of the piles, because these sheets, there's hundreds and hundreds, thousands of these signature sheets. Some of them have 20 signatures, some of them have 2. There's just going to be massive quantities of signature sheets there. And so what they do is they get those and they run through and they validate. Number one, is it a registered voter? Number two, are there any duplicates that we've come across? And then number three, is it their signature? Is there a problem with the signature? And in that process is observed by supporters of the initiative and opponents of the initiative, typically. And so you hang out there for a few days, you're observing it. They actually, the employees at the Secretary of State's office, they pull them up usually on a computer screen, and they go through each one, and they validate every one, and then they keep a tally on their sampling number. And whatever number of problems they have, bad signature, not registered voter, duplicates, those tend to be the three things that they look at. And they'll look at that number, and they'll say, okay, if this statistical sampling sample set would be consistent throughout the rest of the signatures that were turned in for this initiative, would it be enough to disqualify the initiative? And if it's even remotely close, they'll say, yeah, it could be. So then they go through and they count everything. So the more you turn in, when they look at it, they'll say, well, yeah, it's like 2% off or 3% off. That's not very much. So even if we had 3 times that much, they turned in 20% more signatures than we needed. Even if we invalidated 9%, that's not going to matter. It looks like they got signatures done correctly and they're all good. I do know that the Let's Go Washington people do validate theirs, and this is an unusual step because of AI and some of the tools they can use now. They do scan and validate that they're legitimate voters and that they're not duplicates. There's no way that they can validate that the signatures are correct. You can theoretically only do that if you're at the Department of Licensing or if you're in the drug cartels that they've probably given all that information to so they can make fake IDs elsewhere. But theoretically, you aren't supposed to have access to that unless you're the government. So they only validate signatures at the Secretary of State's office. And so and that's mostly out of a Department of Licensing database for the most part. Some of it comes out of DSHS now, depending on people registered to vote, because you only have about 4% of the people in the state registering through the auditor's offices. Most people register to vote through Department of Licensing. And so that's the process. That's what they're going through. Let's Go Washington will have their volunteer teams, the Washington Education Association, ACLU, all the usual suspects that work and put in overtime to destroy your life and ruin the future of your children and everybody else. They'll send their teams in to observe and challenge. And so there'll be some jockeying back and forth. But eventually the math tends to favor, based on what the Let's Go Washington people have done in the past, it would favor them and they'll probably be fine. And then those end up in, because they're initiatives to the legislature, that ends up in front of the legislature. It usually takes about a month to go through the basic process, and the legislature has to decide, do we accept this as it's been given to us and just sign it into law? Do we ignore it or vote no on it, in which case it goes on the ballot in November? Or do we decide that we're going to try to confuse the voters even more and provide an alternative version to what was just passed and put that on the ballot? We'll have to see. My guess is that they may try to play the same game they had before, where they accept it because they don't want it on the they don't want it motivating people to turn out to vote in November, so they may decide not to put it on. Or they may decide that from virtue signaling reasons, let's just we're going to vote no so we can tell our leftist supporters and the billionaire class that funds the entire Democrat Party in our state that we're down with the struggle, and then that's going to go on the ballot and we'll have a more interesting election in December. That's really where we're at with that. Sorry, I think I might have gone into too much detail on that, and that's maybe more than you really want to know. Johnson Sproul 3524. Who, if any, are pending presidential nominations in Washington state? I'm not sure what you mean by presidential nominations. Who could be appointed under the new Senate rules? Maybe, okay. You might be meaning for the Department of Justice, for the attorneys there. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's other appointments that they have. The Seattle Department of Justice attorney that was appointed out there as the interim, who's an immigration judge. I don't remember his name right now. I mean, that he's going to be on this list too. I'm not aware of any judges, actually, that the Trump administration has appointed recently out here, any federal judges. But those would be examples of those two for sure, Pete Serrano and the other guy. But we'll see what happens. That's a good question. I need to look into that a little bit more because I don't have an answer to that. Let's see. Okay, TZ Burton, and I think you meant at We the Govern, and that's why it didn't show up, and I almost missed this as a question. Freedom Watch is reporting a bipartisan bill, HB 2123, to roll back PDC forms to match federal forms. Julie Barrett is concerned this covers donations from foreign nationals. Yeah. So, by the way, this is kind of one of those super wonkish issues. The actual forms that they have you fill out for these foreign nationals, this particular requirement at the PDC was actually implemented because after the 2016 Trump election, going into 2020, I can't remember which year they did it. It might have been like 2018. But it basically was, remember, the only thing the Democrats could think about was Russia back then. And so they were trying to argue that Republicans were funded by foreigners somehow out there. And that was back when the Democrats thought that foreigners funding elections was a bad idea. Now they like that idea. And so now they don't want to have these reports, which to some extent they don't really enforce them. I filed complaints based on this against a lot of Democrats that took money from companies, for example, that were based overseas and owned 100% by foreign nationals. And they had all kinds of hoops the PDC would jump through to pretend like there was nothing wrong with what I was exposing there. And so generally it wasn't terribly enforced, but it was a lot of work for treasurers to try to run through and get these forms filled out. Mostly it was a way to discourage businesses from contributing to political campaigns. And so essentially what you really see is this kind of working its way out, thousands of, well, in this case, hundreds of complaints on that particular issue, and the PDC being a little overwhelmed with it, and both Republicans and Democrats getting tired of dealing with it. And so that's really what it is. It's not as big a transparency problem as it might at first sound. So anyway, that's about that issue. Sorry, it just happens to be that's an obscure issue, but thank you for asking that, TZ. Jason Fisher, 1530, question: what's your thought so far on the Seattle mayor's transition team? I haven't really been paying a lot of attention to the Seattle mayor's transition team. I really haven't. Mostly because in Seattle, you have very few good choices in the bureaucracy in almost any capacity. Mostly, you're just going to have a lot of crazies there. And do you have people that are marginally competent? That's going to be one of the questions that tends to come up. Is there anybody competent left in Seattle? And if so, would this mayoral person be actually willing to appoint anybody with any degree of competency? And my question is, I don't know. I don't see that being super likely most of the time. So I don't have a strong opinion at this point in time on this, but we'll have to see. There is a lot of questions of who she's going to, who she sees. So we'll have to see. Okay, sorry, I skipped down through some questions. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. Here's a question from TZ Burton. From Anton Stetner, HB 1217 is law. It covers rent increases to CPI plus 7% and notices. How bad do you think this will increase cost of housing? Usually, those types of restrictions on rent increase the cost of rentals quite a bit, actually. The one thing that's generally happening across the country is rental costs are going down, mostly because of the large number of deportations of non-U.S. citizens who generally were in the lower-end rental market, at least when they first got here, before they had a chance to set up their fraud operations and steal money from DSHS or SNAP. And so they usually are paying it, and so they're being deported or they're self-deporting or they're not just coming across a border at the same level. And so the rental market is softening up, and actually in some cases the rental market's going down. I don't know if Seattle's had that same impact, but it's likely to. So even though they passed this law, or I should say the law has been proposed, it doesn't mean that it's going to have the impact that people would be concerned about. I think it's a stupid law. It's not one I would ever support. But I think with the rent starting to go down on average across the country right now, despite inflation, just as a result of the market adapting to fewer people that are able to go out or that are going to be renters, I don't know if that's going to have that much of an impact. It is a bad law. Here's a question from Jeremiah, 2911YO. Is there a chance Ferguson could have used cloud seeding? Remember, he was gone 2 months ago and wouldn't say where, or did we find out where? Yeah, I don't think Ferguson himself is directly involved in any kind of cloud seeding operations. And I don't, listen, I don't, weather modification questions aside, I will point out this type of weather has actually happened in Washington State and has happened here a number of times in the past. It has had, like I said, 1933, 1947, and also back in 2000 or 1916. But and there were, if you were living in South County in 2007, South Thurston County, we had a massive flood event. I-5 went underwater down there at the time. This stuff has happened before. It just, excuse me. Just sucks when that happens. I don't think he's involved in cloud seeding, but I'll tell you what, I'd sure like to know where he went, and we really don't have an answer to that. I know there's a variety of records requests that are out there. My guess, though, is he goes mission dark when he does something like that, probably because he's meeting offline, and he's very, Ferguson's the opposite of transparency when it comes to governor. Inslee wasn't very good, but he was just too dumb to really care. And Ferguson's just not exactly, I mean, he's the exact example of the worst of all aspects of government. So when you're both corrupt and not transparent and you're trying to hide where you are, probably it's because he doesn't want people to know what he was doing. And mostly that's because he might have had some heads up on the Minnesota fraud operations. He might be pretty concerned about the Act Blue investigation or the voter roll investigations. And all of those would be things that I would see him panicking about and trying to meet with other people out of state. Remember, Washington State is a relatively small backwater state in comparison to Illinois, New York, and California. And so he'd be very happy to take second fiddle, let those guys take the arrows first and kind of hide in the background, just, like a little weasel or something, just kind of waiting until he figures out which way he can jump to avoid getting hit, but still virtue signal and pretend like he's doing something that matters. And I would say that's probably what you're seeing him do right now. I know somebody mentioned there about looking into geoengineering. We don't restrict that in our state, and that's true. We don't legally make that illegal, or I should say, we don't make it illegal in our state. The only stuff I'm really aware of that they've done this in the past is during drought time eras, and mostly in Eastern Washington. I mean, one of the things where we're located, we get all of the rain that comes in off the Pacific most of the time, and that tends to, you can read about, we actually have a really good professor, shockingly, at UW, who puts up stories, clip mass, on weather patterns and what's creating it, what's causing it to happen. And I would very much be looking at what he has to say about it. Let's see. Jason Fisher, 1530, question, where is your MacBook Pro? Why don't you think we are seeing all these warehouses? Or why do you think we're seeing all these warehouses being built in Southwest Washington? A couple built in bad locations, hard for trucks to get out. First question, the MacBook Pro wasn't mine. I was borrowing it, and so I just don't have it here in this studio. It was in a different studio that I was in, and so it just wasn't mine. That's why I don't have that. The warehouses being built in Southwest Washington, I mean, part of it is, and there's a bunch of them, like if you ever drive up to Lewis County, you'll see a ton of warehouses just as you get out of Thurston County. And the reason for that is that all the taxes, overhead, and regulatory rules are easier in Lewis County to build a warehouse there than it is in Thurston. So you're probably seeing a lot of them because whatever jurisdictions are being put up in, this is still a good location to run freight and to send materials and supplies down to California and Oregon. And also, if you're doing it there, you can actually shoot across the river valley and you can avoid the passes and head into places like Idaho and Utah and Colorado. And so it's logical, if you're familiar with transportation hubs, that they would locate a bunch of warehouses there anyway. You probably just haven't noticed how many were already there. And more companies are doing that more now than they have in the past. And again, remember with Amazon.com and just a lot of the stuff that they're putting out, Amazon warehouses are going to be big. The approach that they're taking to larger distribution centers for some of the places like Costco, Walmart, Fred Meyer, all these other big stores, that's why you're probably seeing that. Now, why they would put them where trucks have a hard time getting out, that I can't answer for you because that doesn't make too much sense to me. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. Next question here. John Sprout, 3524. Is Pete Serrano still acting Attorney General for Eastern District, even without Senate confirmation? And actually, yes, essentially he is. They changed his title. Pam Bondi reappointed him to this other position under some other name, but he's essentially sitting in there as the acting lead attorney. And so we'll see what happens. IDRI Wizard, what advice for concealing fraud do you think Walz had to share when Bobby hosted him last week? Yeah, that was just amazing to me. Bob Ferguson is really clueless about all this stuff sometimes. And, getting a fundraiser being the excuse for why you'd bring one of the most scandal-plagued other governors in America, Tim Walz, basically, from Minnesota, come out and then coordinate with you for probably behind-the-scenes meetings, which I'm sure they had because that's perfect camouflage for why you'd want to do it. And the only thing I can think of is that Walz needs allies that are going to basically stand up for him as the fraud stories continue. Remember, it's not just the SNAP fraud or the Medicaid fraud, or the HUD fraud, or the small business loan fraud, or the student loans fraud. It's just this massive pile of fraud. And Minnesota and Washington actually have some similarities there. If you followed that court case, and some of you might have on X, and I think I pointed this out in one of my videos, but the bag woman, it wasn't a bag man, it was a bag woman who came out to try to bribe the jury, a juror in that trial, and was brought out a bag of $120,000 cash with a note telling the juror to pretend like claim it was racist to do an investigation into Somali fraudsters, and that woman was from Seattle. She came from the Somali community out in Seattle and flew out there with the bags of cash to try to bribe this juror. So something's going on in Seattle, and we're heavily connected to the fraud that's going on in Minnesota. We don't yet know all that information, but it looks like that's where it's going, and we'll have to see what happens there. Kid City 1985, you have been positive in the past. Are you still feeling positive? Yeah, I mean, I'm always an optimistic guy overall. It doesn't mean that I don't think things will get bad or go downhill in some ways, because they can and they usually do. However, there's an opportunity for change that Washington State has in front of us. The people who run away don't matter, because they're just postponing the inevitable for themselves. And they're going to jump into a state that's red, and they're going to think that it's going to stay red, and they're going to not pay attention to what they just jumped into. And then they'll be wondering why the same dumb policies they thought they ran away from were instituted right where they moved. Plenty of friends of mine have gone and experienced that already, and they're frustrated because they put all the effort and energy into doing this. They thought they escaped, and then just because people call themselves Republicans in another state, it doesn't mean they actually have a clue about what it means. And gosh, some of these states like Idaho, I mean, look at what's going on in Boise. You have the same homeless industrial grifting operations, which just spread poison in the community in Billings and Bozeman and Missoula, and in Boise and Laramie and Utah, Salt Lake City. You're seeing this everywhere. And the Republicans out there just clearly don't see it and are worthless and completely clueless, or they're corrupted. I don't know which. And the people are coming out there saying, well, they voted for Trump, so therefore they wouldn't be allowing this stuff. No, most people don't really realize what you and I do if we live in our state. We know why it's so important to fight back. I think this voter roll investigation is a big deal. I think there's going to be some impacts. It's not the only aspect of our elections that have to be looked at, but when you combine that with the federal lawsuit that is going to be decided and the Supreme Court agreed to take up, which is a Mississippi case on whether or not you can count ballots after the election, that's a big deal. That would also affect us. Now, it doesn't eliminate mail-in voting, but it does eliminate some of the games that I believe are played with our voting system after Election Day. So there'd be a lot of impacts that occur with that. My biggest concern is that there's no plan or preparation for accidental success. And we may have another situation like we did in 1994, where a bunch of unprepared, unserious Republicans get elected and they don't have a plan, don't know what to do. And we would probably see that in 2026. Now, you have a governor's race coming up in 2028. If 2026 looks positive the way election reform occurs in our state, then you're also likely to get serious people running in the race for some of the statewide offices in 2028. And all bets are off, especially when you combine that with the Act Blue investigation that the Department of Justice isn't doing enough on right now. And I think that we need a lot more attention on the money laundering operations that are being exposed there. And I don't care if it also exposes money laundering operations in WinRed or whatever other scams are going on. The whole thing needs to be just blown up and exposed for what it is. And then the third issue is the fraud that's starting to come up, and there's a lot of it. You're hearing about the Minnesota stuff, but I think that there's a lot more fraud out there than people realize. There is a lot more fraud going on and yet to be exposed. And the significance of some of that exposure, even in a state like ours where the Seattle Times and King 5 News, these aren't really real news operations. They're largely just narrative protectors for the established political class. Even they may not be able to cover it up completely. And so if they can't, and then this gets out there to a wider audience, I think that you're going to see some level of credibility collapse amongst the people that really do actually fill out ballots. And so if you clean up a lot of fake ballots and address some of the systematic problems with it, you could see quite a few different results that people aren't really prepared for. But this is going to take a lot of work, and it's not as simple as people think. So, and I'm going to restore somehow this popped out. But there is a lot more to do on that. And I'm trying to get back to this, the questions here. Sorry about this. My whole thing disappeared here. Let's see. And one of the things in here, there's a question. The next question here, which, by the way, I couldn't see. I almost didn't miss this here. This is from Susan Shirley 7518. Are there petitions out there for voter ID? Yes, there are. And if so, where do I sign? I would reach out to whoever your local Republican Party chapter is, because most of those are being distributed through them. A lot of the people collecting signatures on Let's Go Washington also have that signature sheet there at events and stuff, but you're running down to the wire. You got to get that signature in. I would try to go out and get it this week. Find out where the Republican Party's having those signatures placed, where they're collecting signatures where you live. It really depends on where you live, and that is happening out there. Then, by the way, that was from Kid City 1985, the question about you have been positive in the past, and are you still feeling positive? Then there's another question here. Gabriel Garza 5879. We need to rip the Band-Aid off the blue slip process, and it needs a reset. That's probably true. I don't disagree. There's a question here. HOX9RN. How come the DOJ won't come to Washington to audit the Democrats? Well, because it's not really about auditing the Democrats. It is about auditing the voter rolls. Now, it's possible they may need to come out here at some point in time, but they don't need to be out here for the audit. They really don't. Now, it could be that the Democrats, or that Secretary of State Hobbs and whatever the corrupt grifting operation that he's working with right now, they decide that they're going to make it so hard that they have to come out here and do it in person. But they really don't need to do that. Most of what they can do, you could do it pretty quickly remotely. I could do it for them if I had those two missing fields and access to some of the same databases that they have. I say I don't mean me personally, but the teams of people that we've had working on the voter rolls out here. We do have some really good people in our state. Well, a lot of people sit back and pre-surrender and cower in fear and hide under the desk and run away into other states. The people who are here actually paying attention to this and trying to figure out what's going on and have been fighting on this issue for a while, we're starting to get pretty dialed in about what's going on. If they do attempt to destroy the voter rolls or conceal or hide stuff in the inactive voter list or do something like that, most of those are games that we're prepared for, and we've been studying this for a while, and we've been collecting the data every month for the last 5 years. So it's possible that they could probably place – I'm anticipating they'll pick games to play, but we do have expertise on the ground in our state that's capable of pushing back and exposing that when they do it, and it's not going to look any better for them if they do. So we'll just have to see what happens on that. But the Department of Justice is also doing this with 17 other states in addition to Washington. So there's a lot going on. Yeah, if you look on the backside of that levy, this is another question. It really wasn't a question, but it was a comment here, and I think it's worth mentioning. Nathan Danner, 4030, look at the backside of that levy break. They were only minutes away from total failure of that section if crews weren't already on the scene monitoring it, and that's right. They came very close to losing that part of the levy. IDRI Wizard, is an illegal immigrant Washington CDL holder's signature valid for an initiative? Good question. It probably would pass the Secretary of State's review. In most cases, it would pass. And the reason for that is that they're all registered to vote. So with very rare exceptions, the Department of Licensing has been registering everybody to vote if they get a license or if they interact with DSHS and they get SNAP benefits or they get Medicaid or they get Apple Health or they send their kid to school. I mean, there's all different kinds of ways they can get registered to vote. Or they interacted with Indivisible or One America or Fuse Washington, and they register them to vote 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times. So depending on what they did, most likely most of those guys are registered to vote. It's kind of tough because the reason why the feds need those 2 other data sets in the voter rolls is that those allow you to avoid false positives. You're going to have a lot of very similar names, Jose Garcia, John Smith, a bunch of names that there's hundreds of options out there. There's at least 4 Glenn Morgans. There's at least 43 Bob Fergusons. So you're not sure, right? Which one's who. And so digging into that is important with those additional identifiers. It eliminates the false positives for the most part. And that's why the state didn't want the feds to have it, because the feds actually do have access to their, for instance, the lists of people who are here on visas, legal visas. These aren't even illegals. These are just legal non-citizens that are here registered to vote as well, and that's illegal, et cetera, et cetera. A bunch of them up at Microsoft brag about voting as it is. So we've got some issues to look at here. Here's a question. Jeremiah 2911 YO. Why does he always skip over my questions? Can you guys see them? Well, I see this one, so I'm not aware of any others that I've missed. I know I read one of your questions earlier, so not purposely trying to skip over it, but if you hit @WeTheGoverned, as you see in the comment section here, it's a little bit easier for me to spot it and pull it out from the background because there's a lot of comments here that go back and forth. Let's see, Jason Fisher, 1530, question, will he continue to see business run, or will we continue to see business run for the exits this next year? Washington has fallen to the bottom of lists of business friendly. You'll see some that leave, but actually I'll tell you what you're going to see more of, not so much businesses leaving. You're just going to see none locate here. There are going to be exceptions, right? That big Nutrien facility they're building down in Longview, because it's a Canadian company, no matter how bad it is in America, we're better than Canada. And so to them, it still seems like they're living the dream by locating a business and a potash distribution facility, port facility down in Longview. But you're going to have fewer companies like that located in Washington. And for big corporations like Amazon or Starbucks headquarters or Microsoft and some of these supporting industries where they have tens of thousands of workers, they have offices in other states. They just simply add their jobs in those other states and they don't add them here. Essentially, that's what Boeing did a lot of. And so that's going to be what you see. It's just fewer people coming here. Now, if they actually start deporting a lot of people from Washington, I don't know. If they deport a lot of the illegals from Washington, remember, according to Pew Research, at a minimum, we have at least 250,000 here, probably closer to 500,000, and it could be much, much higher than that. But if you're deporting or self-deporting a lot more and you don't have a large volume of illegals coming in on top of that, you probably open up the job market a little differently, at least in a lot of the blue-collar trades where they'll have to raise their salaries, and so you're going to see an income lift. You already see that a little bit in some of the statistics around the country. It may not help somebody who comes out of Evergreen State College with a worthless degree from an institution that doesn't matter, but most of those people go to work in the government anyway, and losing jobs in the nonprofit and the government side of things is a net positive. Every job lost gives everybody else a little bit more breathing room. It's a little bit less of a grift, a little bit less pressure on your wallet for the most part. Let's see. Here's one. I think this is a question. This is Aniat Mule 3820. Hi, Glenn. By the way, I don't know why that didn't work. @WeTheGoverned. You typed it in. Oh, you put a period in it. Hi, Glenn. Where do the never-ending increases in our $30 car tabs originate? Legislators, unelected bureaucrats, bicycle lobby. Thanks. Actually, most of the additions to that don't originate at the state level. Most of those are done in your local taxing districts. usually through your transportation benefit district, if you have one or something equivalent to that. Your county commissioners most likely are the ones who are adding to it. I believe that some cities can also add add-ons. So instead of $30, you're paying $90, right? Now, obviously, if you're in King County, the biggest grifting and most corrupt operation of all, Sound Transit, is basically building in a much, much more expensive process. But frankly, most of you, if you have a nice car there, why are you paying for car tabs at all? It doesn't seem like a good plan. Have friends that live up there and they haven't paid for the car tabs in 5 years, and they would have to be pulled over 16 times in a year and get that ticket to actually have it exceed the cost of the car tabs. So a lot of people are doing that right now, and there's a widespread, they believe about 250,000 people in King County. I think that's the number. I might be wrong. I think that's the number, though. It's King and Pierce and Snohomish is wherever that Sound Transit area went. But a large number of people, at least a surprisingly large number of them, are not getting car tabs. So that's what a little bit of rebellion now and then does look like at that level. Nathan Danner, 4030, did you notice that they quit mailing tab renewal letters? I found out after I went down to buy my tabs. I was wondering why I didn't get a letter. You know, I actually still do get letters, so it might be the county that you're in that's not doing that, but I still get those. But that is something I'm going to look into a little bit more. Thank you for bringing that up. Jason Fisher, 1530, question, Colorado is pursuing a natural gas ban through the bureaucracy. Will the natural gas initiative hold up? Well, again, that's a good question. We're wondering what kind of scam and who's paid off the judges in our state. Remember, our judges are almost comprehensively corrupt to a judge. So politically pressured, they will make whatever decision they're told to make. When it comes to these types of cases, it doesn't matter so much if you have like a traffic ticket or something. But if there's something that really matters, our judges are totally corrupt in Washington state. There's nobody on the appellate or the Supreme Court level that's going to be honest. And they've been all appointed pretty much by the political establishment right now, and so they have made it clear that that honesty is long gone, and political corruption is the name of the game right now. So there's a lot of work to do on cleaning up the judges in our state, but we'll see what they decide to do on that. Colorado is also, it's weird because Colorado and Oregon, they're like mini-me's of Washington. Washington's sometimes the mini-me of California, but we're also an innovator for dumb ideas sometimes too. So, and then we spread these to the states on the East Coast for the most part. Let's see. I'm trying to go down here to the next question here. TZ Burton, Congress just passed a bill to counter Trump executive order on public sector union negotiations. This was based off of the 2018 Janus decision. What's going on with Republicans voting for this? Well, you're going to find corrupt Republicans, unfortunately. They do exist. There's plenty of them out there, and that's too bad. And one of the challenges with that is that those judges or those Republicans are influenced by public sector unions, teacher unions, SEIU, AFSCME, those unions, and they have a lot of money. And so the most corrupt Republicans in America that are in Congress are willing to just trade their soul for that money. And those organizations are universally terrible in almost every measure. I can't even think of anything that they've ever done that's been any good. So they're big government on steroids, right? They're destroy the taxpayer dollars. They hate free speech. They don't like transparency. They like there's every dumb, bad intersectional idea that comes through them. I will point out, though, I don't think that bill has passed because it didn't get through the Senate, so I don't think it got enough votes in the Senate. Even if it did, my guess is Trump would veto it, and they don't have enough votes to do that. Let's see. Kathleen, 253, a lot of DSHS programs are from Minnesota School of Social Work. Well, that's interesting. Scary thought. I didn't know that. I'll have to look into that. Let's go down here. And what time? Okay, guys, I'm a few minutes out, so I'll do another question here. Jason Fisher, 1530. Question, have you upgraded Windows 11? What are your thoughts on it? I was still running Windows 7 all this time until now. On one of my computers, I believe I did. Yeah, so one of them has that. And I don't have I've had to deal with this for so many years. every time you upgrade, you regret that you did, but you kind of have to, and then you get used to it, and then something worse comes down the pike, and they force you to be doing that. So, but you do the best to adapt. That tends to be how things go. Any way you look at it, when you're doing technology, I never really trust anything and assume that it's always going to be just getting worse. Here's a couple more questions. I'll try to get these in, guys, just so that I'm not missing anything here. There's only one Bob Ferguson. He'll sue you if he thinks you're also Bob Ferguson. Good point. I'm glad you made that point. We discovered that last year. Michael Case, 8231. Not so much the floodwaters, but instead waters of Jay Inslee's Orca Fund. Why has it been impossible to find out how much has been collected, $1 billion and more, and how has it been spent? It's not impossible, but they like to delay it. And it's what you're really talking about is a CCA fund. One of the things that it looked like about half of that money is being diverted into some big transportation, basically Sound Transit, but we'll see how that goes. Or no, the ferry. Sorry, the ferry system. My mistake. That was going to the ferry system, but we'll see how it's going. Sports Flick 83. How is the Washington Doge going? Will you be doing the trainings again? Yes, I am. It will never end. It's about training more people to keep looking into this stuff. So we have some scheduled already in January, I believe, out in Spokane. But yeah, we're going to keep working on that. One of the things, I've got a couple projects that are rolling out this next year. In addition to my long-delayed, hopeful plan to get a studio up that's my own, I can do a lot more video work if I do that. It's just I'd be able to do probably 3 or 4 times what I'm doing right now. Plus, I could train more people, and it would be easier for me to bring in guests. That's one of the things I'm hoping to do. But Washington Doge is not going away. We got a lot of projects next year to work on that. Then IDRI Wizard, speaking of judges, is there any way to hold them accountable to the oath they took to uphold the Constitution? Best thing to do is just simply run an aggressive, hard campaign against them and expose them in advance, time after time for months, with stupid, dumb, bad, corrupt decisions that they make. They will not forget that if you do it, and the word spreads amongst the other judges, and it does actually change how many of them make those decisions. And I think that's something to remember a little bit when we're trying to do all this stuff, is that public exposure of this is actually, it does matter. It adds up. And you may think it doesn't because you don't see them instantly go to prison or something like that, but that kind of stuff does, that pressure does make a difference. There's a lot of work going on out there, a lot of people trying to do the right thing, and I just want to encourage you to get out there and do that as best you can. There's a lot of opportunities to make a difference in our state, and I hope that you take advantage of that. Now, obviously, we're heading up to the holidays right now, and with Christmas just around the corner and New Year's after that, I hope you're spending some of it with your friends and family. Remember what matters the most, and it should start there. It should start at home, and then it should move to your neighbors and your community. That's where things matter. A lot of us, I think, do get obsessed about what's going on in D.C., and it does matter. But if you pay attention to what's going on the home front first and then work your way out from there, I think life's going to be a lot better for you. I feel like it is for me when I do that myself. So with that, thank you guys for putting up with my technical incompetence here in the new studio. I'll try to be a little bit better at that next time. And let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you're watching this video long after I've had the live stream and you have comments, please put those in the comment section down below. If you ask a question you think I didn't get to or I inadequately addressed it, also leave that comment section in the video down below, and I'll try to do that for you then. With that, though, I'm going to close this video just like I do with all of them, with a quick reminder to people that the future does belong to those who show up. Thank you so much for watching tonight.